Hello and welcome to Fireside Chats with me, Dr. Peters. I was born and raised in New Hampshire, and I completed my PhD at the University of Glasgow. My research focuses on the intellectual history of the US Constitution and how that history, philosophy, political theory, and constitutional law can help us better understand and address contemporary social and political issues. Today, what I'd like to chat about is how we choose our representatives, particularly what qualities or characteristics we look in those who we ask to represent and lead us. And I want to do so in the context of how we view the wealthy, famous, and powerful. It appears that there's a cultural bias to view the wealthy and powerful as somehow wise, virtuous, successful, and capable leaders. They're appropriate choices for representatives and positions of public trust. Now, what raises this question and its framing is the continuing release of the Epstein files. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of them and try to connect the dots. This isn't to take away from the horrificness of what these files detailed and what's happened to the victims. However, I think the questions that I proposed will help us start to understand why some of the people in these files were elected. And in doing so, potentially help us find a way to better protect our children, society, and democracy, as well as improve them. Particularly, I want to explore this bias we have in favor of the wealthy and powerful to be our representatives and leaders. And I think in exploring how the founders discussed this issue and also failed to fully address it, we can start to understand how we got here and how we can do better in the future. Now, our founders did not face something so horrific as what's detailed in the Epstein files. However, they did debate the qualities and characteristics that representatives should have. And we can see this in the debate over the ratification of the Constitution. Particularly, some people were worried that the Constitution was going to institute an aristocracy or empower what some at the time called a natural aristocracy to use the government to serve the natural aristocracy's interests and not that of the people. Wilson answered these concerns in the Pennsylvania Ratifying Convention. To the charge of aristocracy, he pointed to elections. How could an aristocracy form if we could regularly vote people out of office, particularly those trying to institute an aristocracy through the federal government? However, the charge that the natural aristocracy or the already wealthy and powerful would use their government to further their own interests instead of the common good, Wilson had less of a straightforward answer. He asked the other representative to define what he meant by natural aristocracy. And when that representative failed to give an answer, Wilson answered himself. He said, if by natural aristocracy we mean the best in the community, or as the Pennsylvania Constitution charges its voters to elect those who are wise and virtuous, then yes, of course, we would like the natural aristocracy to be our representatives. In some ways, Wilson is skirting the issue here. However, he does so in a somewhat helpful manner. What kind of characteristics and values are we looking for in our representatives? Now, the founders also put provisions in the Constitution to allow people from more middling means to hold office. They recognize that the best and the brightest might not always have their own private fortune, as many of the founders did, to support them in holding office. And that's why the Constitution provides a salary to all elected officials, representatives, senators, Supreme Court justices, and even the president. And moreover, at the Constitutional Convention, the very idea of instituting an aristocracy was put forward and very quickly and very firmly rejected by the members of the convention. So clearly, in theoretical terms, the founders did not see the U.S. Constitution, nor did they intend for the U.S. Constitution to form an aristocracy and to a large extent not favor the quote-unquote natural aristocracy. However, importantly, Wilson in the ratification debates explains that the ultimate check or balance against corruption and tyranny in the federal government is the people themselves. He said that he did not expect the people to elect an association of demons, but if they did, the fault would not be in the Congress or legislature, but rather in the people. That it's up to us to choose our representatives and leaders wisely. Now, while there was a general consensus among the founders that the US Constitution was not creating an aristocracy, but rather, at the very least, a republic or a democracy, as we discussed in the first video. The American culture and society at the time of the founding had some more aristocratic proclivities, and ones that I would say inform our current biases in favor of the wealthy and powerful. These are what some have termed the Protestant work ethic, as well as the institution of chattel slavery. The Protestant work ethic is grounded in the Calvinist doctrine of predestination. Essentially, God predestines some to salvation and others to damnation. Now, this scared people because it also said your actions didn't matter. God had already made that decision for you. So, to ease this anxiety and concern, pastors explained to their flock that there were signs that you were part of the elect or those chosen for salvation. Now, part of this was you did and wanted to do God's will, which at the time mainly included working hard and not flaunting and wasting your money on luxuries. The result of this is you tended to become wealthy. And so wealth became a shorthand for virtue and wisdom, or what Wilson said we should be looking for in our representatives. Alternatively, chattel slavery is essentially aristocracy without the titles of nobility, and moreover, it embodies and enforces this idea that some are born to rule and others are born to serve. In the institution of chattel slavery, the children of slaves inherit the condition of slavery from their parents, and the children of slave owners inherit what is essentially a fiefdom and a community of people to rule over. However, unlike feudal lords and serfs, plantation owners owned their slaves. They were property, and thus they had more power over them than a feudal lord did. As property, slave owners could use and dispose of their property essentially however they wished. Now, James Wilson in his lectures on law rejects this idea completely and argues against it. However, at this time, the social organization of half the country was based on this hierarchical structure of slave owners at the top and slaves at the bottom who are ruled over by essentially authoritarian dictators. Now, these cultural norms and social institutions continue to reverberate with us. I would argue that the idea of the Protestant work ethic has evolved into what we call the prosperity gospel today, which essentially removes that whole not so much fun bit about not wasting or flaunting your money by buying luxuries and showing off. Pastors fly around in private jets, and portions of the population practically worship the rich and famous and powerful. Similarly, the hierarchical structure of chattel slavery is still with us. We see it in white supremacy and ethno-nationalism and the way that we deal with immigration. And where these cultural and social norms overlap is in this proclivity among Americans to see businessmen, CEOs, wealthy people as capable leaders, winners, people we should elect to be representatives, senators, governors, presidents. They appear to be chosen or obvious leaders in terms of the prosperity gospel or the Protestant work ethic. Similarly, they're the top of the hierarchy. And if we think about a corporation in political terms are at best constitutional monarchies where the CEO is essentially a king and the board of trustees is like a parliament or privy council, and at worst is authoritarian dictators. So we can start to see these similarities and potentially where some of these biases come from that led a large portion of the population to vote for and empower many of the people that we're finding out are in the Epstein files and far from wise, virtuous, and capable leaders. If the files are correct and the witnesses' accounts are true, these are barely human beings, but monsters. Now, I say if, because I still believe that everyone has a right to due process, and their guilt or innocence should be decided by a jury of their peers, not because I doubt the witnesses or the evidence that's coming forward. So from my perspective, what these files illustrate is that this bias in favor of the wealthy and powerful as good and virtuous leaders It's not only unfounded, but dangerous. And it surprises me that it's taking such horrific events and accounts to challenge this bias. We all learned in high school reading Animal Farm that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And this is what Wilson saw in his theory and why he said that the people should be the ultimate check. He saw that politics and power was more likely to corrupt people than anything else. It also presents a challenge to think more deeply about the qualities and characteristics of the people that we give power to and how we relate to them. In John Dewey's terms, as we looked at in the last video, part of being a citizen of a democracy, practicing advanced citizenship, is making sure that our representatives are held accountable to serve our interests and follow our will, and not for us to follow theirs. I think part of this veneration of the wealthy, famous, and powerful is this desire for a great man or great leader to save us and tell us what to do. That's not democracy. That's aristocracy. We are supposed to govern ourselves. And that means choosing our representatives and leaders wisely and holding them accountable. And as Wilson also argued, that is our right and duty, that we, the people, are the ultimate check and balance on our government. It means it's within our ability to hold them accountable. So what will we decide? Will we align with our founding ideals and take up the mantle of democracy, holding our representatives and the perpetrators of these horrific crimes accountable? Or will we continue to venerate the good and the great, our betters? Moreover, will we decide to do better than our founders and prove on the foundation they gave us and actually translate this ideal from theory into culture and social institutions? This was their failure. It was a failure that many historians see as leading to the Civil War and the issues that we're seeing today. So, will we continue to venerate wealth and fame as the pinnacle of human success? Or will we choose to venerate other virtues? Wisdom, loyalty, honesty. And the important part of this decision is if that we, the people, decide that these are the things that we're looking in our representatives, we'll get different representatives. But more importantly, we'll get a different society. And that societal change will have a greater effect than just who we elect to be our representative or senator, but more broadly in terms of how we all decide to govern ourselves, how we want to better protect and improve our society. And I would argue making that decision will actually lead to a better society and a safer one. And for now, I'll leave you to ponder that. As always, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below. And if you found this interesting or informative, feel free to subscribe. I put out new videos and essays every Friday at 8 a.m. And with that, I'll say good evening, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.